Hello everybody, my name is Mist and welcome back to my web development tutorials. In this tutorial we're going to be looking at some of the wonderful tools we have available to us for decoding and debugging our CSS. Oftentimes when we're coding, developing a website, things start to look a bit wonky, a little bit funky. We're not quite sure why. Thankfully, we've got some tools available to us in the web browser which make it very easy to see what's gone wrong. So, I've got one of my apps open here. This is my anime recommendations app. And I'm just going to, somewhere on the screen, doesn't really matter where, I'm going to right click and go down to inspect. I'm doing this on Google Chrome. It should work the same in Firefox, although the display might be just a little bit different. If you're working on a Mac or using a different web browser, you may need to just have a look to see how you get into the inspect the dev tools here. Also, if you are on the Scrimba platform, I'm just going to hop over here. So this is one of the Scrimba apps, and I'm just going to, if you want to get onto the dev tools, if I try and right click in the center here, it doesn't do anything. We have to go up to the top, this gray bar here, right click, and then we can click on inspect and bring up the dev tools here. Okay, so now that we're here, oh good lord, there is a lot of information here, a lot of different tabs. Thankfully, we don't need to know everything about this in order to make use of it. So I'm going to go through a few different things that we can use to help us with our CSS. First up, we are on the Elements tab right here, and you can see if I just open this up a little bit, we have a listing of every single element that is on the screen, which is fantastic. And we can, as you see, if I just scroll down, you can see it's highlighting those elements on the main screen, which is great. It gives us that visual indication of this is exactly what we're looking at, which is great for finding things. Alternatively, we can do it the other way. There is a little icon up here. If I hover over it, it says select an element in the page to inspect it. So we can click on this, and now I can go into these, and you see they're highlighted for me. And let's say I wanted to check the search button. I click on this, and the search button is now highlighted in the DevTools. Very, very useful feature. And this becomes especially useful, again, if you're in Scrimba, because there's a lot of stuff here because it shows everything on the page. And it shows a lot of stuff that we don't actually need for when we're trying to debug our own CSS. We can click, and then we can just make sure we've got our preview window selected. And from there, we can see the tools that we have. I'm just going to hop back to my app just so it's a little bit cleaner to work with. And I'm actually going to do a little search function. Whee! That's so much fun. I love that little animation. So, now that we've got an element selected, what can we do? What information can we go? Because there's a lot of information in this DevTools that we don't really need right now. But there's certain stuff that we do want to have a look at. So I'm actually going to select an element, and I'm going to select this Cowboy Bebop H1 header right here. So we're going to click on that. Okay, it is selected in the Elements tab. Now, if we have a look in the Styles sub-tab here, this is where all of our styles are listed. Everything that is related to this H1 tag is listed down here. There's a few things to keep in mind. So whenever you see something that is crossed out, like we've got this font size 1.17 cm, that's crossed out, which means that it's been overridden by something else. Okay, in this case, it's been overridden by this font size var up here. The reason why I bring this up is because oftentimes you might get a little bit confused with your CSS and see, oh, I'm sure I gave it particular styling. You have a look in here. Oh, yes, I did, but it's been overridden by something else. The other thing to keep in mind about this kind of thing is that there are default stylings that are available to you. In some ways, this is fantastic. In other times, it's not. And often I see people on the Discord, they say, there's this huge gap that I never put in. What's this gap doing? I don't want this huge gap in my page. How do I get rid of it? And oftentimes that is a default styling, particularly when it comes to any kind of text. So the headings, the paragraphs, all of them by default have some kind of margin. And you can even see that here. Yeah, we've got this margins. And if I have a look on this side, highlight this, you can see it says user agent style sheet. Whenever you see this user agent style sheet, that means that is a style that has been given by default by the web browser. If you're curious to see what all of these default stylings are, in the link down below in the video description, I will put a post from W3 Schools, and it lists every single HTML element and the default styling, so you can check that for reference. It's fantastic. Make sure you look at that. But yeah, in your DevTools, whenever you see user agent style sheet, that means the default stylings, okay? Which is why we've got this display of block in here. And I make a habit of making sure I get rid of the default stylings and the default font sizes to make sure they're as I want them to be, which is why these are crossed out. So that's all fine. Gives us the whole list. Really, really nice. But there's more. What else can we do with this? Well, we can temporarily disable stylings. I'll show you what I mean. So if I just go up to here, if I hover my cursor over here, you can see we've got some blue boxes with white ticks. Okay, those mean that these styles are being actively used by the web page, but I can disable them. Have a look. So I'm going to go here where it says color, and we've got this orange color here. I'm going to tick this box. See immediately what's happened. All of the H1 headers have gone back to their default black color. And we've got this line going through here to tell you that this has been disabled. Okay, and if I want to bring it back, I can just bring it back. Okay, this is incredibly useful. It allows us to go through methodically each of the stylings that we've got applied and disable them one by one, and then see what effect that has on the web page. This is incredibly useful. Please make use of this. It's great. And we can do it for all of these things. So I can change the font back to the default. I can change the font weight and the font size back to the defaults. And it's all there. And this is great. I'm going to actually re-enable these, but this is something that we can do. On top of this, we can do a step further. We can actually add new styles to this within the web browser. So up here, we've got element.style. And if I just click inside of here, we've got this colon, which means we can add stylings. So let's say I want to just very quickly test what would this H1 header look like if it was a different color. So I can literally just type in your normal CSS styles. We can go color, colon, and we've got all these colors. Look at this. Check out the screen on the left hand side. As I'm scrolling through the colors, I can see all the different colors and how they look. Again, this is incredibly useful for checking stuff. It means that I don't have to open up my code base. I don't have to scroll through my CSS to find that styling and do it manually and then reload the page every time. I can just do it within the web browser. And I can see, okay, this particular green color. I might think to myself, ooh, I quite like that green color. What is that green color? Okay, it's chartreuse. Fantastic. And then I can apply that permanently later on. So I'm just gonna, let's give this a nice aquamarine color. There we go. It's over there. And just like before, I can toggle these styles on and off. So like that. Nice and easy. It should be noted that these kind of things are temporary. So if I refresh the page, everything goes back to how it was before. So just keep that in mind. It is only temporary changes. If you want to make permanent changes, then you'll have to actually go into your code base. But this is a great way of trialing stuff out without fear of completely messing up your code. There's one more other thing that we can do inside the styles tab here, which is we can change the state of things. So I'm actually going to just select this show info button right here. So we've got the show info button, okay? And you can see if I hover over it with my cursor, it's got a hover effect. It changes color, okay? Now, what if I want to see what those styles are and tweak them a little bit? How can I do that? Well, again, we have a tool for that. If I go into my styles subtab and I click on this little hover button, now I can force a state. I can tell the web page I want this particular button to act as if it's being hovered by the mouse. So I can click the hover button and you see now the show info button has changed color to what it would be like if it's hovered, and I've got the hover stylings here, and I can disable them, and I can add new stylings on as well. So let's say I wanted to test out a different color. Okay, so let's say I want here color, and let's change it to aqua. You can see again, just like before, as I'm scrolling through the different colors, it is changing the text color on the side there. Incredibly useful. Make use of this. And just like before, I can toggle these stylings on and off, do whatever I like with them. Okay, and then when I'm done, I can just untick the hover and it goes back to as it was before. Okay, fantastic. Moving on then, we're going to look at one of the other tabs. So we're going to look at the computed subtab. Again, very, very useful for checking styling. So there's a few things on here. First of all, right at the top, we've got this diagram. And this diagram is great because it shows the positioning, it shows the margin, the padding, and the borders, and the size of each element. So I've still got this show info button highlighted. And if I hover my cursor over this diagram, you see it highlights on the screen, this is the margin, this is how big it is, this is what it looks like. Here's the border, here's the padding, all of these things. And this is, again, fantastic. If you ever have an element that looks out of place or you see a big gap in your screen, check those elements because chances are there's going to be some margin and it's very easy to tell what the margin is. Okay? Underneath that, we've got the filter. So all of these styles here, these are all of the styles that are on this specific element. And we can check, we can have a look. So if I click this little down arrow here, I can see where this style comes from. It's saying user agent style sheet. That means that's the default styling. Okay, I've also got this one here, 120% HTML. That's coming from my index.css file. And in fact, if I click on this index.css file, it takes me to the sources tab. I'll go over this very briefly. The sources tab is where all of your files are listed. So here's my index.css file and all of my styles. It's a little bit funky because it shows it all in one line, but I can do this. So this little icon down here, these brackets, format the CSS, and now it shows up as it normally would in your code editor. And I can have a look through. Look, all these styles are showing up. This is everything that's being applied. Very, very useful. Let's go back to the Elements tab, Computed subtab. The other thing that we can use this for is to refer back to the Styles subtab. Anything that you've changed yourself, so this doesn't apply to the default stylings, but anything else. So for example, this position of absolute, if I want to see what that styling was, there's this little sideways arrow. I can click on this and it takes me back to the style subtab and shows me exactly where that style is. Again, very useful for seeing what kind of stylings everything has been applied to. If we scroll further down, right down here at the bottom, last thing I want to show you on the computer tab is the rendered fonts. if you've tried to apply font, sometimes it can be hard to tell if the font has actually been applied or not. This is a very useful way of seeing it, so we can see that on this particular button, the font being applied right now is Montserrat Thin, which is exactly what it should be because we've got this font family of Montserrat. Okay, if this for something went wrong, let's say the font didn't load into the web page, then it would default to the sans serif, and then it will show sans serif down here at the bottom. On the Elements tab, if you're working with Flex or Grid, sometimes it can be very confusing, and I've been there. When I was first learning Grid and Flexbox, I was so confused. It was so hard for me to visualize what I was doing. Again, there's a tool to help us with this. And you know what? I wish I had known about this when I first started learning Flex and Grid, because it would have made life so much easier for me. Every time you give an element display flex or display grid, you'll get a little flex or grid button. Div has a display of flex, and then my recommendations container has a display of grid. If I click these buttons, suddenly on the main screen we have visual representations for those, and this is so useful. If you're ever confused about where things are being placed and how they're being placed in the grid or the flex, this is a fantastic tool. It gives you that visual representation, and it's just so useful. And we can have as many different things grid. It shows up all these different grids, or we can have them disabled. Okay, and you'll notice there are some numbers here when it comes to grid. This is great because it shows if you're trying to position things like, I want this particular element to span the whole way across. Let's say we've got this Cowboy Bebop text. We want it to span the whole way across. Fantastic. We've got this 1 and this 3. So we know that we can give it a grid column, span 1 and 3, and then it will go all the way across. And this is just such a useful indication for where things are being placed. Really make use of this. It's great. It also shows the gap. So if you've done a gap in between everything, then it shows up here as this cross-hatched part. And honestly, having this visual representation will help you so much when it comes to learning how Flex and Grid works. And if that wasn't enough, there's another thing to help us. So if I just select my recommendations container, it's got a display of grid, and in the styles sub-tab, where it has display grid, there's this little grid icon, open grid editor. I can click on this and have a look. I've got loads of things that I can tweak, again, temporarily. But if I want to see what different properties will do and how they will affect, I can do that. So pay close attention to the Cowboy Bebop container as I click these different buttons. And you can see how they change based on what properties I give it. Very useful. And again, this is just temporary. As soon as you refresh the page, it goes back to normal. So don't worry about breaking anything. You physically cannot break things in this editor right here, because as soon as I refresh, everything goes back to the way it used to be. But this is great, again, for troubleshooting, for trialing different things, seeing what works. It is fantastic for that. The last thing I want to show you is the mobile views, the mobile responsive. Oftentimes, when we're developing, we want to make sure that our projects are mobile responsive, because let's face it, the majority of people who are viewing our websites are going to be viewing them on mobile. So how do we do that? Well, again, one way we could do it is I can just, if I scroll to the side, so I'm literally just clicking and dragging, it does actually change the view. You can see it changing into its mobile view, and we can do it like that. But let's say we don't want to do that. Or let's say we don't also want to, for example, do it with the main browser window. That can cause us some issues. Plus, it doesn't actually go very far, especially on Chrome. It only goes to 500 pixels wide. That's the, like, I'm dragging as much as I can. That's as far as it goes. And there are phones that are slimmer than that. So that doesn't work. So what can we do instead? Up near the top here, there's this little icon, toggle device toolbar. If I click on this, you can see we've got a new view, and we've got this option where if we select responsive, it lets us freely move this in and out, doing whatever we want with it. Or if we want to see what this will look like on different devices, I can select the iPhone SE. I can select the Samsung Galaxy S8. I can select the S20 Ultra, etc., etc. All these different devices, I can check to see how my web page looks on every single device. And if it's a phone, I can click on this little toggle button so I can rotate. This is what it looks like in landscape view. This is what it looks like in portrait view. And the other thing about this is it actually checks. You can see my cursor has changed this little bubble. So hover effects don't work on mobile. Yeah, that's just a fact of life. They don't. So this actually changes the cursor to how touch controls will work on a phone. Yeah. So I actually have to click to change the page. For example, like this. Okay. Again, very, very useful. It's not a 100% substitute for actual seeing a website on a proper mobile device, and I would encourage you, when you're developing, to periodically, or when you're finished developing, check everything on an actual mobile phone before you consider it done, because this can be a little bit misleading, but it's still a fantastic representation of what things will look like, and it gives you that good starting point. Yeah. If things are breaking in this kind of view here, they will definitely break when you're on mobile. So things to keep in mind there. And then once we're done, we can just click the icon again and go back to the way it was. So I hope that's been helpful to you. Like I said, there are tons of tools available. You don't have to use all of them, but if you start using some of these tools, you will find you will be much more consistent with your CSS and able to troubleshoot it a lot better. See what happens. Again, remember, anything that you do in these dev tools is temporary. As soon as you refresh the page, it goes back to the way it was. Don't worry about breaking stuff. Okay? Give it a try, see what happens. If you have any questions, you can look me up on the Discord. My name is Mist on the Scrimba Discord. And aside from that, hope you have a fantastic day, and I will see you later. Thanks. Bye.